It's so easy to kind of just want to go in 100 different directions because I'm still young and I have a lot of opinions and I think I'm right about everything. And so there's a lot of topics I want to touch. But there are a couple that have actually just kind of grabbed my attention. Okay? And Mom has this little plaque that hangs on the wall at the house that says, sometimes on your way to the dream, you get lost and find a better one. Something like that, yeah. And that's me with biblical studies. Okay, I pursued music my whole life because I thought that this is what I want to do. Not that I don't enjoy music, but then to only discover along the way to music that there's something I actually like more. Okay, and so at one point I felt like, okay, so that means I got to quit doing the other things so I can wholly focus on that, and maybe I did it for a time, and that's fine. But now, like, I can play my guitar and I don't feel like I hate it, and it's more something I just do, right? But I didn't get life from music. It was just something I enjoyed. I get life from biblical studies, okay, and from studying language. And I read weird languages, and I study them, and I learn grammar, and it excites me. And linguistics makes me happy. About 8 people in the world just went amen. But it is what it is, right? And there's no accounting for what we love and what we enjoy, and we're all different, and I feel like I've always been encouraged to chase what I love by my parents, and that's a good thing, and so here I am. And in the process of all this, I've come to a point where I've kind of realized that a lot of the frustrations that we have with Christianity, with the message that it teaches, with even the Bible, and with one another a lot of times, all comes from things that we have heard other people say. And what I mean there is well-trained pastors and theologians who come along and tell us what things mean. And meaning is not arbitrary. And the fact that all of them don't agree all the time should tell us something. Right? That there's either one of two things going on. There's ambiguity in the text, or none of them know what the hell they're talking about. And it can go both ways. It really can. There are times when I have a book at home. It's 2 volumes. It's 1,100 pages. And the entire 2 volumes it's a theological book, is completely undone by the phrase, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You just wrote 1,100 pages on something that is disprovable by Jesus' own words. Really? So I got really, really frustrated because I hear these theologians talking, and not that they're all bad, but good God, a lot of them are. And an awful lot of them really are just giving you their summary of a really long theological tradition, which is fine, but theological tradition did not come from Jesus. It came from church people, which is fine, again. We've got to learn to separate out Jesus and Christianity. Christianity is the religion that has practices that we do certain things because we want to look like Jesus. Christianity is not how you get saved. Okay? We need to understand that. Buddhism is a set of religious activities, and it's different in religion, in that sense, but that center around the teachings of the Buddha. They don't worship Buddha, okay? We have practices that center around the teachings of Jesus, and we worship Jesus, okay? But that's the religion. Jesus was not a Christian, Jesus was a Jew. That shouldn't be shocking to any of us, hopefully. So when we start to get into these little especially the online debates, oh, my religion's better. No, look, all religions are stupid, and all religions are good. They've all got dumb things that they do, and they've all got good things that they do. And being in community with one another and learning to eat together and to live in harmony and peace, that's never a wrong goal. Okay? So if you want to critique some other religion, then make sure that you're doing all the things right from yours. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about it. Okay. Or stop critiquing everyone and let's just live our lives and have fun. But I kind of hit this point where it was like, okay, this theologian says this, but this theologian says that, and this theologian says this, and there's all these like barrage of like, Jeff Turner calls them gospel grenades. You know, when you throw like a verse at somebody because their doctrine isn't the same as yours? It's like, well, what about that one passage that I'm not going to exegete or show you the context or talk about what the words mean? You know, but this is what we do, and we keep going back and forth. But at the end of the day, what is the foundation of all that? It's the Bible. All of that argument and all of that debate and all of those thousands of years of opinion is all based in what people think they're reading in the Bible. So we can either become really well versed in 2,000 years of history of people's opinions, or we can become really well versed in the Bible. I've chosen to do this route. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think that people got to do what their heart pulls them to do, and some people are genuinely drawn to theology, and I think that's great. And obviously, I do theology, right? But what gives me life is studying the Bible. I'm going to read this because I think this kind of summarizes it perfectly. It says, "And Jesus said unto the theologians, Who do you say that I am? And they replied, You are the eschatological manifestation of the ground of our being, the kerygma of which we find the ultimate meaning in our interpersonal relationships. And Jesus said, What? That's about right. That's how most of us should feel when we hear some of the stuff that gets spouted by theologians. It all has its genesis in the Bible, but a lot of times, like the word kerygma is a Greek word, and we don't understand that, and they just throw it out because they want to sound smart. But the smart people know how to make the big words accessible to everybody, okay? So the more you tend to do that stuff, the less secure you are about it. But anyways, so that kind of summarizes it, though. The problem is that we have this Bible, which is going nowhere, and a lot of dead theologians who have already gone. And we're holding on to their words about the Bible, which has gone nowhere, long after they have gone somewhere. And we're essentially letting dead men's interpretations control how we view the Bible, and so how we view others, and so how we treat others. I'd like to spend about 30 minutes alone in a room with all the evangelical pastors in America talking to them about absolutely why you may not ever use the Bible to condemn homosexual people. And I'd like to do it with just language, and I can show all these idiots, no, this is not what it's saying. That's not offensive to anyone here. I love it. But the point is, like, there's still people doing that. You know, and I don't think the proper response to someone either making up a word completely, like homosexual, which that's not a word in Greek or Hebrew. The answer to that isn't making up definitions for other words that we don't like. And this tends to be the ditch that the grace people fall in that's on the other side of the road from the fundamentalist ditch that's way too literal, right? We want to say, well, that doesn't match my current theological stance, so I need to go through and find a word that does. And we start to define things weird. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't actually say that there, it says this. And the problem with that is when we do stuff like that, like if I were to tell you, hey, this verse in this particular book of the Bible, this word isn't there. You might believe me. There might even be a translation out there that would affirm what I'm saying, but anybody who has access to the Hebrew text could tell you that I'm lying. And we no longer live in a time where information is limited to the man up front. You know, it used to be that like the pastor, you know, was the guy. He was the one who studied the word because he had access to everything. You don't. You know, how is that different from Catholicism again? I don't know. But the information was kept for the chosen frozen, And like they were the ones who got to make all the decisions about what things meant, and then they delivered that to people. But now you don't have to do that anymore. Whoop. About to fall out under the power. Now you can actually go online and check what people are saying. I did that at one of Andrew Womack's meetings when Bobby Andian said a word meant something. I don't mind using names. And he said a word meant something, and it was a Hebrew word, and I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I went and looked it up, and no, it wasn't right. He was making it up. But you know what? 3,000 people in that auditorium didn't check their lexicons because they've never been taught. So what I'm trying to do, that's a really long intro, to tell you that what I'm trying to do is to help you learn to read the Bible so you can spot the bullshit from a mile away. Yeah. And I mean, that's really what it is. You know, yeah, or smell it from a mile away. That's even better. You know, there's no reason anymore. There's no reason for clergy and laity. That's garbage. We are all disciples of Christ. Because I have a particular interest in language, linguistics, and ancient texts, I tend to want to talk about the Bible more. And so for some reason, that gives me the right to get up here every Sunday instead of someone like Kevin to talk about erosion, which is a huge problem, right? Like, we have environmental issues that need to be dealt with, and we have someone in the church that knows how to deal with them. That's interesting too, you know? But I get to talk on Sundays because this is our Christian time. Sorry, Kevin. He's like ready to, he's like, oh, wait, I get to talk? So all that to say, why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I feel like we're at a time where enough is enough. And I don't feel like everybody who wants to read the Bible has to learn Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Okay? I do feel like anybody who wants to criticize the Bible or the translators has to learn Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Okay? Because you don't get to criticize someone's choice of translation if you don't know the language they're translating from. That's silliness. And yet we do it all the time. I see it on Facebook like daily. Oh no, this way. Are you even like somewhat versed in Aramaic that you're able to critique that verse? Or no? No? Okay, then shh. You know, and it's painful to watch because what do we do with it? Then what we've done is we've got the Bible down into this little systematic book where people who lived over like a 3,000-year period or a 2,000-year period suddenly agree on every point. No wonder people think Christians are dumb. In no other thing in the world would you do that. You're not going to take Shakespeare and compare it to Walt Whitman and say they agree on everything because they're both poets. That's silliness. But when it comes to the Bible, because it's all bound in one leather cover, we say, yeah, they all agree on everything all the time, and so then anything that doesn't agree, we go back and we start trying to justify. And we change words, and we remove words, and we change. And look, sometimes, yeah, you can translate things a little differently. That happens. Okay, but sometimes it's just that you don't like what it says. And me, and I don't. I mean, there are a lot of things I don't like what it says. It just says what it says. How many of you were like really blessed by hearing Daniel talk about the local context for the flood narrative and how this story is known in the ancient Near East? You know, there's some broader context you can get to that, and the fact that both Egypt and China have written records that go back further than Israel's do, and neither one of them record a flood. Okay, so if you think there was a global flood, you have a lot of written record to deal with. However, if you think that there was a localized Mesopotamian flood, there's also a lot of written record to deal with that verifies that and says, yes, there was a lot of flooding going on here. So see what I'm saying? It helps to kind of expand our view a bit and to take a step back and say, okay, well, since then, Egypt and China and other civilizations don't record a global flood at any point in their history, what is actually being said in this story? And I think Daniel did a good job with all that. If you didn't hear that, go listen to it. I'm not going to repeat it. He's an actual Bible scholar. He's got his PhD. No, and especially when we're dealing with Genesis, which is where we're going to end up here in just a few minutes. When we're in Genesis 1 to 11, there's not a scholar, even the most conservative scholars out there, call this the mythology portion of Genesis. And they don't mean it's fiction. What they mean is mythology deals with the gods and with their activity and with the creation of the world and things that people couldn't have possibly been there to see. Okay, so they write a myth about it to tell the story. And we've gone over a lot of this. We've seen, Genesis 1 and 2 directly speak to both Egypt and Babylon's creation stories. They say the same kind of things that the other stories say, but they keep putting Yahweh at the helm, or they say, oh no, he did it this way. Babylon's creation story, I won't read the whole thing to you, but Marduk fires an arrow at this goddess named Tiamat because she has become basically like she's an overbearing woman. Okay, she's a goddess that the gods don't know how to handle. And maybe she's going through menopause and they're like, whoa! But she decides she's just going to go ballistic and she's going to kill everything and she's wreaking havoc. And Marduk brings the wind and he throws the Ruach, which is God's spirit in the Hebrew Bible, but he throws the wind into Tiamat and she starts to expand and then he fires an arrow into her mouth and it splits her open and from all that blood and carnage and death, creation happens. Isn't that lovely? And it's old. It's like thousands of years old, and it's really, really gory, the way they talk about it. And this is their idea of, and half of her is split off and becomes the firmament above, and the other half is split off and becomes the firmament below. I mean, these are stories from Genesis, right? So Genesis is engaging its local literature. And they're carrying this stuff, and a lot of this is why scholars still say, hey, look, even though there's no archaeological evidence of an Exodus, the fact that they're engaging the Egyptian creation story does testify to the fact that they knew it. And if they knew it, they were probably there, at least at one point. Okay? So, as we're getting into this now, we're coming to the end of what scholars call the mythological part of Genesis, and it's dealing with this stuff, prehistory, everything in this portion of Genesis is etiological. It's meant to tell us why things are the way they are, right? At least at the time of the author. Okay? So if you'll keep that in mind, a lot of times you read, oh, this is why we're fallen, right? Why is Israel in exile in Babylon? Why has Babylon come? Well, because there's sin in the world. Why is there sin in the world? Well, because Adam. So there's reasons that they have to go back and explain. It's Paul Bunyan and his blue ox wrestling and carving the Grand Canyon. We know we have a Grand Canyon. So how do we deal with that? We can't call it fiction because it's at least partly true. So this is how it is, especially with Genesis 1 to 11. You can't call it fiction, but you also can't call it history in the sense of like we would do history. We're too addicted to science. We want history to be 100% factual. They want history to be true. And there's a difference. So I'm not going to cover all the stuff that happens in the flood, obviously. But I am going to kind of pop in here, and we're going to go to Genesis 9. And I'm just trying to find which verse I want to start in. Okay. So let's just go to verse 11. I'm establishing my covenant with you that never again, Kevin just says that the Grand Canyon was caused by erosion. Paul Bunyan. Hey, look, I had a book that it was his axe, and he was being drugged by Babe. Oh, okay, so Pecos Bill did it. See what I'm saying? Was it Moses, Abraham, or someone else? Yeah. It's like, no, but this proves the point. We still do it, right? Genesis 1, no Genesis 2. Knows Paul Bunyan, knows Pecos Bill. Like, do we not get it? People never change. There's always someone who's wrong and someone who's right. I am establishing my covenant with you that never again will all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, nor will there ever be a flood that destroys the earth. Well, that's good to know. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I'm making between me and you and between every living creature that is with you for future generations. My bow I have set in the clouds, and it shall be for a sign of the covenant between me and between the earth. And notice here that God's covenant is between the earth and him. He's making a covenant with animals and earth too, not just man. Okay? And those of us who want to read this literally should breathe a sigh of relief because animals are always cool. So that means we're good too because God's not going to judge the animals because of us. Okay? So if you think that God's going to rain down fire in the last days, you're wrong because he's not going to destroy the animals no matter how bad we are. And when I make clouds appear over the earth, the bow shall be seen in the clouds. And again, this is pretty obvious what they're doing here. They're trying to say, why do we see this dispersion of colors coming from the clouds when it's raining? Right? And this is a cool story, but we also know that this is just what happens when light passes through water droplets. Okay, so at no point do we need to really believe that light passing through water droplets was caused by God killing a bunch of babies. You know what I'm saying? Let's just put it all together where it actually is. That's not what the point is. However, there is this cool statement here that God says he's never going to kill everything again. Then I'll remember my covenant that is between me and you and between every living creature with all flesh. Again, this covenant is not between God and man only. It's with all flesh. And the waters of a flood will never again cause the destruction of all flesh. The bow shall be in the clouds and I will see it so as to remember that. So it's now, not only has God put the rainbow there as a sign, but it's also to remind him, oh yeah, I can't wipe them out. I want to, but there's that rainbow. Which, if we really take that literally again, maybe that's cool that the homosexual community has adopted the rainbow, because now God can't judge them. Oh, that just pissed someone off. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I am establishing between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. So this is the fourth time now that it's been made abundantly clear that this covenant is between God and all flesh, which is, that word doesn't just mean people. That flesh word, that means anything that's got meat. Okay? So cattle, and donkeys, and sheep, anything that's got meat has a covenant with God. Let that begin to work on your covenant theology a little bit. So that I'm so special because God has covenant with me. He also has it with a slug. They're little fleshy things. I think that's awesome. I think that's cool that a few thousand years before Jesus, someone had the foresight to say, God has covenant with everything. Not just the human beings, everything. Now the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. Now that's interesting. Why is there this little aside that says, and Ham was the father of Canaan? It doesn't say anything about Shem and Japheth's kids yet. Interesting point here, parents. If you're ever naming your child after someone in the Bible, don't name them Shem. That's the Hebrew word for name. His name is name. Well, it's about where we are with our kids. What do you want to name this one? Shem? Name? For our viewing audience, I have 7 children, so... These 3 were sons of Noah, and from these 3, the whole earth was populated. So what this is a priestly document, okay, or at least has a hand of a priest in it, for those who don't like this documentary hypothesis. That's more for a certain person listening online. And this is kind of known among scholars as the Table of Nations. And what this is attempting to do is to outline all of the nations of the world and where they came from. Okay? So if you look at these, you'll get an idea of what their world looked like. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but there are some. So from these, the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a man of the ground, and he planted a vineyard. And he drank some of the wine and became drunk, and he exposed himself in the midst of his tent. Not uncommon for a drunk man to get naked, okay? Nothing weird to look at there. However, what I do want to point out, and this comes from a scholar named Mike Heiser, and he's not the only one, and not every scholar agrees with him, but I think it makes sense in explaining what's going on here, okay? So you'll notice that Noah begins to be a man of the ground, okay? So that takes some time, right? He has to, at least, at a minimum, he has to till the soil, prevent erosion. No, he has to get it ready. He has to plant something and let it grow and tend it and take care of it. And it says here, okay, and he planted a vineyard. Okay, so now he's become a man of the ground and he's planted a vineyard. And it's not like vineyards aren't like kudzu or whatever. They don't just and they're there. This doesn't happen in a matter of minutes. This is years. Grapevines take forever to mature into something big enough to produce, enough wine to drink, right? So there's a considerable amount of time that needs to pass here. And he drank some of the wine and became drunk. Okay, so now not only has the time passed for him to plant a grape seed, to let it grow, to tend it, to get it up on one of those wires that goes across so that the grapes are hanging down right, Then he also has to harvest the grapes, mash them, and allow them to ferment. So this is more time. And then he's got to drink it. And yes, you can get drunk pretty quickly, but it's not like you take a drink and you're drunk, right? It takes some time again. So all of this there's a lot of time being shoved into two little verses. Okay, let's say conservative estimate, something like 15 years has been compressed down into two little tiny verses. He exposed himself in the midst of his tent, and Ham, the father of Canaan. Now again, why does Ham need to keep getting denoted as the father of Canaan? Sorry, Mike, I'll try not to walk so much. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, and the two of them put it on their shoulders, and walking backward, they covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were turned backwards so that they did not see the nakedness of their father. Then Noah awoke from his drunkenness, and he knew what his youngest son had done, and he said. Okay, so first what I want to do, how many of your Bible says had done to him? At that last part of verse 24.
Yes.
Okay, that's an interpretive move made by someone else, because what most will agree is that the text says what had been done. It just leaves it as he knew what his youngest son had done. Okay? So what this particular scholar that I'm talking about now, what he does with this text is he talks about, look, there are earlier precedent in the passage, there is time being bypassed, right, in a couple of verses. They've compressed it down so that you're dealing with a lot of time in a couple of verses. Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves he shall be to his brothers." Then he said, "Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them. May God make a space for Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave for him." Okay, so why on earth does Noah curse Canaan, who is the son of Ham, when Ham is the one who has done something wrong in this story? Why? What's the point? What? So some scholars are going to say, well, Noah knew that Ham was near the end of his life, and he wanted the curse to be long-lasting. And so what he did was he cursed his son so that Ham would have to witness his son becoming a slave. Okay, that's one approach. Hold on. Mom the theologian trying to talk over there. Some scholars will say things like, what his youngest son had done to him means that Ham actually had relationship with his father. It's ambiguous. Okay? But then again, why does he curse the son? Why not deal with the sinner rather than his child? What's the point? Well, what this particular scholar says is that because you've got all this other telescoping going on, there's obviously some more in the story. Okay? And so what he says is that Canaan is the offspring of incest between Ham and his mother. Now, where you get that is that Leviticus says repeatedly, to sleep with your mother is to see or to uncover the nakedness of your father. Okay, this is in Leviticus, and we can get some verses later, but it says it repeatedly, multiple times. Do not sleep with your sister, because to do so is to uncover the nakedness of your father. Do not sleep with your father's wife, because to do so is to uncover the nakedness of your father. So this story could be saying something like, Ham had relationship with his mom because there's not a lot of women on earth, and they know they need to multiply and fill the earth. So what Ham does is he waits for his mom and dad to get drunk, and he goes in when his dad's passed out, and he has sex with his mom. And Canaan is born from that. So Noah curses Canaan. He says, cursed be Canaan. He doesn't curse Ham. He curses the offspring. Okay, now, again, there are scholars that are going to disagree with this, and that's fine. None of them agree on anything anyways. But it makes a lot of sense. Because Canaan is the direct, name holder of the people they're trying to dispossess. Right? And we see this in the Bible actually multiple times where was it progenitor, is that what it's called? The main guy that starts the tribe, and when it happens to be a tribe that stands opposed to Israel, is said to come from incest. Yeah?
Was Leviticus written before or after Genesis?
I guess it kind of depends on who you ask. No, seriously, because some scholars think that Leviticus is actually very, very old, and that most of Genesis was written after the Babylonian exile in response to Babylon's legends. So that's why you can say Leviticus is older, or you can say Genesis is older. And
That ties those two passages together.
It does. It does. And again, most scholars are going to say that when you see things like this, that's a priestly hand in the text. There's usually the priests are the one who carry the text on. They store the documents, they copy them down. And let's rid ourselves of the false notion that scribes are malicious and nefarious. Okay, and Bible translators, they're not. They don't go to school for 8 years and study dead languages for 15 to 20 years just to be jerks.
Yeah, they're trying.
Most of them are jerks before they start. No, if you're a jerk, you're just a jerk. If you're someone who wants to use the Bible to oppress people, you're going to do that when you learn it or not. But a lot of people actually come out of that stuff when they learn more and more, and they start to realize, there's actually not a case for that. So we need to kind of rid ourselves of this idea that, every time a man touches the Bible, he's trying to hold a woman down. Not really. The Bible just says some things that hold women down, and we need to learn that we don't have to obey them. I think that's 9/10 of the battle, is learning to read the Bible and appreciate it as what it is and not feel so then I need to obey everything it says. Because there's a lot of stuff in there you just don't want to obey. Good God, I'm glad my parents didn't obey all the stuff that talks about killing your kids when they talk trash to you. I still do it. I'm almost 40 and I still I get miffy, and it's thank you for not being literal. So yeah, there is that notion, and that's something we would go deeper in, at a home group or something. For example, hint, hint. Yeah, so the idea then is that Canaan comes from incest. Okay, well, we see this again in a couple other people. Anybody want to take a shot at this? Because I know some of you know. No? Okay, so Lot with his daughters. And who comes from Lot's daughters? Moab and Ammon. Who are the two nations that are said can never enter the assembly of Yahweh? Moab and Ammon. Okay, so these are, why? Because Deuteronomy 23 tells us. Why? Because they didn't give you food when you were wandering in the wilderness. Okay, so all of the hatred of Moab and Ammon in the Bible is based on the fact that they didn't feed the Israelites when they were wandering. Okay? They weren't neighborly. They weren't hospitable, and hospitality in the ancient Near East is everything. You know, Abraham demonstrates what hospitality looks like. These angels come in, he doesn't even know him. He's like, kill the lamb, bring him some beer, give him a robe and a foot rub. You know, like he treats them like princes. That's hospitality in the ancient Near East. So for Moab and Ammon to not feed Israel was like not cool. So then what Israel does is they tell their story as incest. Oh, well, you just come from your progenitor having sex with his daughters. You know. Well, but guess what happens? It happens with Judah and Tamar too. Ouch. So it happens. So it's like this stuff just keeps getting woven in, and you see it, and it's a common claim against your enemy in the ancient Near East that they're from incest. And another one is that they can't reproduce. Because reproduction is life, right? That's the command in Genesis. Go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. And if you can't multiply, it must be that God has cursed you. So if you're impotent, God isn't with you, so therefore, you know, they'll say things like the Moabites are impotent. Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves he shall be to his brother. Now, interesting to note, Canaanites were never made slaves for Israel, even though this says that. Then he said, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem. And I don't know why this isn't the God of Noah or the God of Japheth. It's just the God of Shem. And let Canaan be a slave to them. And here, obviously, we understand that Shem is representative of Israel, correct? And we'll find this out in a little bit, like it traces down the line for you so you know that. But then what you're supposed to think is, oh, that's why he was so blessed and favored. Yeah. May God make space for Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem and let Canaan be a slave for him. And Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. These are the generations of the sons of Noah. Now, some of this stuff might sound boring, but it's all important. Okay, so these are the generations. That word is toledot in Hebrew. And anytime you see that word, it's always a separate document. Okay? It's not originally a part of the narrative. It's a piece that they've put in that's a list of names. Okay? And these are very common again in the ancient Near East, and it's family names. It's genealogies. They did this, and there's genealogies all throughout the Bible. Okay, and so this one got woven into Genesis, and it says, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Children were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Those are all seafaring areas. So all the sons of Japheth are all the seafaring people. Okay, this is what they're doing. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah, those are all far east. Okay? Like, or at least far enough east to not be Israel. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And, I think those are also all, because Tarshish is another seafaring place. So I think these are also sea people. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, yeah, there's a lot of people on earth, but they all came from this guy Noah, because you all know about the flood, right? Like, and everybody says, yes, we do, because they did, because everybody in their area talked about it. And they say, so you owe your life to this ancestor of ours who had a covenant with our God. You see what they're doing? Like, you're only here because one of our ancestors had covenant with our God. From these, the coastland peoples spread out through their lands, each according to his own language, by their own families in their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. How many? Yeah, Mitzrayim, it says there. So the sons of Ham were Cush, which is kind of like Ethiopia, Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Okay, so these are like, Cush is black people. Okay? Egypt, a lot of Egyptians are actually darker skinned too. And so the Hamitic line goes down that way. Okay? And so like, this is before Israel is slaves in Egypt. And they're outlining, hey, guess where Egypt came from? The same ancestor of ours. They had covenant with our God. Okay, so at every point, Israel is trying to assert that Yahweh is the name above all names. He's like, you're only here because of his great favor. You know, it's kind of what they're saying. And the sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka, the sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to be a mighty warrior. He was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Therefore it was said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Now, does that sentence make any sense? The words like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. No. So what we've got there is them quoting some ancient source that apparently everybody just knew. And they don't give any explanation for it. And man, scholars have gone on for thousands of years about what this could possibly mean. And you know what? You're never going to know. You can have all your opinions, but at the end of the day, it's just like, it's like it was a common saying back then. Oh, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Like everybody's like, oh, okay, yeah. You know, it's like us, like it's raining cats and dogs, and everybody's like, yeah, but like people in 2,000 years are going to be like, what? It rained animals 2,000 years ago? Man, how Earth has changed. You know, we do this over and over with the Bible. You know, we think that the New Testament writers at any point in their mind fathomed that the earth would be 2,000 years old after them. There's no way. Have you written anything that you've written now with the mind of people in the year 4000? Can you even fathom that far ahead? No. So let's not make the Bible do that either. Okay? It speaks to us, but that was not what they were trying to do. Okay. Therefore, it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Now, really, there's a scholar. I've got a Genesis commentary that's 3 volumes. It's huge. And he spends like 23 pages giving his opinion of what this phrase means and who Nimrod could have possibly been. You're never going to know, bud. That's a good educated guess. Thanks for wasting 30 minutes of my time. Now, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. The two that really are kind of important here are Babel and Akkad. Akkadian is the language of Old Babylon, and it's one of the cognate languages for Biblical Hebrew. And a lot of Biblical Hebrew words come from Akkadian. A lot. Okay? And there's a lot of interplay between Akkadian texts and Biblical Hebrew texts. Okay, so they're outlining here almost kind of like giving a wink to where they know they came from. And we all know what Babel is. From that land he went out to Assyria and he built Nineveh. This is still Nimrod, apparently. He built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, Resen between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. And Egypt fathered, this is a guy. Egypt fathered. So Mitzrayim is some dude, apparently, who fathers all these people and then goes down and starts a nation. So you see what these are like? All these people are like nation starters. That'd be like us saying, well, the founder of America was a guy named Jeff America. You know, this is kind of how they're doing it. So Egypt's fathers, Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, and Kazlahim. I bet I could read those better in Hebrew. From whom the Philistines came. We know who those are, right? And we know at what point the Philistines became a problem for Israel, right? And so we know that the reason that they actually bring out the name Philistines there is because it's written later, right? Okay. That's got a point to it, you know. You don't write about a nation that isn't troubling you yet. You write about one that is. And especially when it's a little aside like that. Oh, Ham, the father of Canaan. You know those guys. Those ones we're about to go wipe out in the name of Moses. Canaan fathered Sidon, and it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the days, like that. This is a person who becomes a city and a tribe, and Heth, and the Jebusites and the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archosites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites, after, all the ites that God tells you to wipe out later, just so you know. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were spread abroad, and the territory of the Canaanites was from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the descendants of Ham according to their families and their languages, in their lands and their nations. Okay, so we've got all these descendants of Japheth, who are the seafaring people, and all of the descendants of Ham, who are the kind of like Eastern African people. Okay, and then now we're going to get and to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber. Eber is where we get the name Hebrew. Okay, it's from his name. But you'll see, like, Eber isn't even one of Shem's kids, so it's weird. He calls him the father of all the children of Eber. So what they're saying is, hey, Israel, you know where you came from? Shem is actually your father. Okay? The older brother of Japheth, children were also born, the sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. Aram is Aramaic. It's where we get that name from. Okay, so like all of these names become countries and stuff later on. And the sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. And Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. So this is a great-grandson? Yeah. Shem is called the father of Eber, but he's the great-grandson. Okay? So, again, I mean, that should be clear enough. We're not saying he's the actual biological father. He's one of the fathers, right? Like a church father. And to Eber 2 sons were born. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and the name of his brother was Yoktan, or Joktan, however you want to say it. And Yoktan fathered Almodad, Sheleph, Hazar, names, all the way down to Jobab. And their dwelling place extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, and according to their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations and in their nations. And from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Okay, I know that's boring. I know there's a lot of names there, and a lot of them don't make sense. If you're someone who's interested in geography, you can go find a good scholarly commentary on Genesis, and they'll tell you what all these nations are. Because all of these names are associated with different people groups and nations in the ancient Near East. Okay, but what this actually does for us is it kind of gives us the geographic boundaries of what might have been flooded. So it's kind of like East Africa to kind of East ancient Near East. Like it's not Far East, and this would explain why both Egypt and China don't have records of the flood. Okay, I mean, obviously this is silly because when we talk about like, oh, and this guy fathered this guy who fathered this guy who fathered Egypt, and you guys are saying, well, wait a second, I thought you said Egypt didn't have a flood story because it's older. It is. Like, this is one of those points where the Bible makes no sense because Egypt is already around at the time. They've got writings from further back than this is supposed to be. So it's not, whoever's writing this just kind of is saying, hey, Egypt came from one of our our ancestors. And yet, So do with that what you want to do with that. But this list has kind of given us a boundary to what probably might have been flooded when they said the earth is flooded. East Africa to the ancient Near East. That's a big flood. And it's no wonder my world is flooded, is what's on their lips. And it's no wonder that all of the peoples of the world come from this guy, because it's as far as they know. And beyond Egypt is desert, and you don't do that. And you don't go beyond the east, because Babylon will wipe you out if you go there, so you don't go east. Right? Like, if you go too far east, it's like you're dead. And so we know where our boundaries are. And so that's the world. And so the earth was flooded. But what's funny is the word earth in Hebrew doesn't mean globe. It just means land. So I mean, people who insist on a worldwide globalized flood where billions of people and animals and all that were killed aren't even being faithful to what the Hebrew text says. Now, there are times where the whole earth and things like that, but the word is land. They didn't have the idea of a globe. Okay, they had the idea of a flat plane that was stretched tightly on pillars, the pillars of the earth and the foundations and all this. And there's a firmament over the top and a firmament underneath, and water comes from underneath and water comes from the firmament up top. And above the firmament, though, is the Elohim. And that's where God lives. And the angels and God's messengers, those are the Elohim. And that's why the psalmist says, you've made us a little lower than Elohim. Like, literally. They're higher than us. They're up there, and we're down here. It doesn't mean hierarchically, like we're less important. It just means you've put us in a location lower than them. We get to live in the fertile area at the bottom of the mountain, and they have to live in the bald area that's freezing at the top. Like, you can look at it, you really can. You can look at it like that. Who is man that you would give him the fertile area? You know? It helps to know the cosmology of Israel and to know what they're saying when they say this stuff. Okay, let's see, where are we? We still got some time. I don't want to go into the Tower of Babel yet because I'd rather do that as a separate thing because there's some cool stuff there to deal with. So essentially we've got here then, this huge flood happens. Presumably, all life in the immediate area is wiped out. And so much so that there really isn't much questioning of the flood in the ancient Near East. Meaning, like, you don't have anyone in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, any of those books questioning whether the flood happened or not. They all knew it did. That's why Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah. He knew there was a flood. They knew it happened. You know, but that doesn't mean that it's global. That doesn't mean that whole nations and whole people groups who don't record a global flood are like lying or hiding the truth or anything like that. And it also doesn't mean that the Bible is lying. You know, and all of this is, I know it's hard, but we've got to learn to weave together the willingness to wrestle with what is being said. You know, Jacob wrestles with God, right? At least that's the story that we're told, but the Bible actually says he's wrestling with an angel, and then he calls him God later, and this happens a lot too. But the wrestling with God doesn't come out with Jacob saying, okay, I've got my theology all packaged up, and I'm ready to go into the ministry. No, Jacob comes out, and he's got a limp, and his hip hurts, and his name is changed. Right? And I think he probably walked with that limp for the rest of his life. You know, if we're going to be factual with the story and say it happened and all this. And because to wrestle with God will cause muscle strains. I mean, try and wrestle with this building sometime. No, it's going to exercise you in ways that you have never exercised before. Okay, I turned 40 in like 2 weeks, and I started hitting weights again. And when I was 18, like, I could go lift weights, and I'd be like, done. I'd be like, yeah, I feel good. Like, now I work out my chest, and my leg hurts. And I do leg day, and my neck hurts. I'm like, what is going on with my body? And things are changing as I get older, right? And as I'm learning to wrestle with the Bible, I'm going, why does my back hurt? You know, why's my theological back hurt from wrestling with this? You know, and sometimes you walk out of this stuff with a limp. You know, my limp changed from, let's say something like, no, I'm not even going to go there because I don't want to cause confusion for anybody. We've all got our limps. Let's just put it that way. We've all got our things that we used to think that we don't think anymore because we had to wrestle with God about it. And sometimes those things that we think are limps are actually like, you know, a limp can be a sign. It is for Jacob. It's a sign that he wrestled with God, right? And was victorious. If you want to, like, he was victorious, but he's still hurting. You know, we can wrestle with the Bible. In fact, we should wrestle with the Bible. In fact, if we're really imitating Jesus, we will wrestle with the Bible. But I give everybody like some breathing room here. You don't have to. You can put it away. And you can never look at it again. And Jesus will love you the same as he did when you read it all the time. And God's opinion of you will never change. And he is never going to be pissed off that you're not reading his word. And he's never going to speak to you and say, you know, if you had just been reading my word, that wouldn't have happened to you. Okay? But if you want to learn to really deal with this stuff, the majority of reason the world has rejected what Christians have to say is what Christians have to do. The secondary reason is the idiocy with which we read our Bibles and the things that we make massive issues that are nothing in the Bible. The Protestant Bible, which is missing several books that are in every other Bible, has some like 31,690 something verses in it. Of those 31,000, let's just say 32,000, I'll round up and be a good American economist. Of those 32,000 verses, there are 4 that say anything about same-sex relationships. Do you think that 4 out of 32,000 is cause for a doctrine? Do you think it's cause for abusive behavior towards people? What if we said that there are something like 18,000 verses that talk about loving one another? Well, that's an issue. And people, well, you can't chuck the small stuff. No, I absolutely can. And I don't mean chuck it like it's not important. I mean learn to deal with it and then saying this is why it's no longer relevant for us. But the problem is most of us don't want to do that because that is hard work. And it is what it is. If Shakespeare had written in French, it would be really hard for me to accept English critiques of his work. And the Bible is not written in English. The Bible is written in Hebrew. It's written in Proto-Canaanite. It's written in Aramaic. It's written in Greek. Some of it's in Syriac. There are a lot of languages used that aren't English that talk about this. And so when someone wants to say, therefore, this translator did the wrong thing, I got an issue with that. Because I think it's better to say, no, this translator did it right. Now let's deal with the uncomfortable nature of what that says. Because when we do, we're wrestling with it. And we're not, it's dismissive to say, oh, that doesn't look like Jesus. I don't have to worry about it. Again, do you need to obey it? No. The Bible never says obey the Bible. It really doesn't. You'll look in there and it actually never says, hey, obey the words that are on these pages. You're supposed to obey the words of the Lord. Some of those words are found on the pages, maybe. Some of them are not. But what we do is we go back and we say, well, this is really uncomfortable. And I don't like that God has wrath in the Old Testament. And I call it Old Testament instead of Hebrew Bible. I've said this before. There is one Bible and the early Christians were commenting on it. We have this, I'm just going to rant for a while. We have this mistaken notion that when 2 Timothy 3:16 says all Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for reproof and doctrine and instruction in righteousness, that they had a Bible. They didn't. They had the Hebrew Bible, and they had the book of Enoch, which we don't use, and they had other books that we don't use because they've been lost to history. So if all Scripture is God-breathed and some of those books are not in our Bible, what do we do with that? Or if it says all Scripture is God-breathed at a time when the New Testament had not been canonized, it cannot be talking about itself.
That's right.
Meaning, Timothy isn't talking about Timothy. Or for that matter, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Because those books hadn't been made part of the Bible yet. They're not Scripture yet. For all Scripture to be inspired, something needs to qualify as Scripture. And when Timothy was written, the New Testament wasn't Scripture yet. Okay, so however we're going to handle these things, we need to learn, and this is what I'm trying to help with, to have a little bit more critical eye with things. And to say, why would they say things like, the Lord planted a garden eastward in Eden? Because they're west. Or cursed be Canaan. Why? See, sometimes we read that and we say, yeah, cursed is Canaan, and you just keep going. And you don't say, wait, I wonder if historically Canaan was ever made slaves to Israel. They weren't. So Noah's curse didn't come true. Israel was made slaves in Egypt, but Canaan wasn't made slaves to Israel ever, not once. So it's like, it's a false prophecy. And yet we just read through it. And it's like, and we accept it and we say, yeah, no, God flooded the world. Oh, and he killed babies? Yeah, he killed babies. And he killed animals. But what about that part where they say that Egypt came from a guy who was after Egypt came around? Like, well, it doesn't matter. There's no contradictions. I mean, this is what people will say. You know, the more foolish will say things like, oh, God put the fossils in there to test your faith.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, Ken Ham says that. It's like, really? I don't care how you feel about billions of years old and all that, but like God will put fossils in the layers of the earth to test your faith. How historically myopic, number one. Like, we've only been digging for fossils for like a few years. So it's like God was only interested in testing people in the 21st century. Everyone else, he tested them by killing them and their kids. That's how now he just tests by randomly placing dinosaur bones throughout the world. No matter how long those things take to turn to oil either, God put the oil there so that you would be tested on whether the Bible is right when it doesn't say anything about the age of the earth. Oh, forgot about that. Genesis 1 doesn't say the earth is X amount of years old. Duh. But again, we read it this way, and we keep literalizing things. And I think I'll close. Mike asked me a couple weeks ago a really good question, and I think that's worth like sharing in a more public setting. He said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" No, he said, "Yeah, like where do we start?" Well, when I was a boy, I was born to Mike Miller. Everybody's like, "Enough." Just kidding. No, he said, you know, the question kind of came to him too of, what are you doing when you're talking about the Bible in church? Me particularly, what am I doing? And do you even believe in the Bible? And I think those are really valid questions to ask of a Bible teacher in a church. So I'll answer those publicly. What I am doing, I've just explained. I'm trying to help people learn to read the Bible a bit more critically and for themselves. Martin Luther had a great vision of helping people learn to read the Bible for themselves. He said, reading the Bible in translation is like kissing your bride through a veil. Okay, still good. I'll kiss Gabby through a sheet, don't care. Better to not do so. But either way, fine, okay? So if I can help people, and again, do you have to learn Hebrew? No. Can you? Yes, it's free to learn. You don't have to go to seminary anymore. You don't need to leave your home. There are websites with free stuff on them that teach you Hebrew and Greek. And it's like not hard anymore, you know? And yes, you need a lot of time to become fluent in a language, but you don't need a lot of time to learn how to kind of start identifying certain things. And when someone says, hey, this word isn't in the Greek, and you can say, well, actually, it's right here. You know, I mean, it doesn't take much to say that. It doesn't take much to learn how to use a lexicon and to see that like translations like the Amplified Bible are kind of silly. You know, if I'm going to like run to the store, do I say I'm going to work, walk, possibly ride, you know, like all the possible definitions of run? Do I give you every definition it could be every time I say a verb? No. Things mean things in specific contexts. And a good lexicon will help you. And you can learn this stuff, and you don't have to, but you can. And you can, and you should, if you feel like, one of the things I've said is, you know, I think Christians, first and foremost, need to learn how to read the Bible so they can protect themselves from these guys. Because typically, these guys are only reading things, typically, with the mindset of, oh, well, so-and-so in my church acts this way, and I know how to correct that. Oh, you're having trouble with this? Well, this verse will deal with that. You know, why don't I just teach you how to read it, and then instead of me telling you, hey, here's what this verse means, you can say, man, this really spoke to me this way. That is. You know, I mean, like, America prides itself on our colleges teaching people how to think and not what to think. Yeah, right, I'm in college right now. That's not the truth. But How about the church lead the way in that? What if, like, instead of worrying about all the political bullshit, we decided to socialize teaching Hebrew and Greek to our congregants? And we said, you know what? You're all smart enough. Every single one of you has the mental capacity to learn Hebrew and Greek. You don't have to have the desire, but you have the capacity. And there's no reason other than just not wanting to not learn. And if you don't want to, don't. And don't feel any guilt. And don't feel like, the only reason I feel comfortable in doing what I'm doing is because I know that He will never leave me nor forsake me. And so I can go all over the place. I've got creative ADD. I seem to have verbal ADD too. I've got creative ADD, right? And so like when I would sit down to write music, within 5 minutes I was either like drawing or doing a website, or like I just can't focus and do one thing. But when I'm studying the Bible, I can go Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, English, various translations, and I'm on the same verse. And so it's helped me kind of, but if that's not you, that's fine. I have zero interest in learning how to control erosion. None. If I sat in a class, my eyes would go, glaze over. But that doesn't make what Kevin does less important than what I do, or less important than what Bruce does, or less important than what anybody does, really. It's we all have our interests. Mine just happens to be the thing that we all worship. We say we worship Jesus, but it's the Bible. No, that's true. You shouldn't. But, for better or worse, Christians are a people of the book. And we can be better people of the book if we'll learn to be people of the man who's in the book. And he's in that part that we call old, too. Right? So is Jesus Lord? You don't have to say yes. If you don't believe that, that's fine. But for Christians, Jesus is Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, then He qualifies as that wherever that title happens to be used, which includes the Hebrew Bible, which is why we have to wrestle with Him and say, what's going on here? Why? Why? And I like progressive revelation. I like the idea that God continually climbs into the minuscule boxes we build for Him so that He can hang out with us. Leviticus is a box that was built for God. And so God doesn't, in the beginning of Leviticus, if you'll read it, God doesn't say, hey, I'm commanding you to sacrifice and here's how you do it. God says, hey, Moses, tell the children of Israel, when you sacrifice, here's how I'd like you to do it. So He doesn't say, do it. He says, if this is the box you're going to build for me, I'm going to climb into it, but I'm going to tell you how to do it. Okay? And when you look at all the things that are forbidden in Leviticus, it's actually kind of interesting. Okay? He forbids same-sex sex in Leviticus. Why? Because they're at the altar. He doesn't not forbid normal sex. You just don't have sex at the altar. That's not the right place for that. There's other people there. No one wants to see that. You have to do it this way. Why? Well, if you put the blood this way, then this is going to, there's some things we need to work through, and that'll be another one we might have Daniel back in because he's good with that stuff. But there's a point to all this, and God keeps climbing in, and He keeps saying, okay. Did God command the sacrifices? Really, I guess it kind of depends on how you read the first 2 verses of Leviticus. If you read chapter 1, verse 2, and it says when or if, then, you can say God didn't command them. And Jeremiah does as much. He said, hey, I didn't command the sacrifices. I gave you an option. I said you can if you want to. But I didn't say you have to. You'll notice God never judges Israel for failing to sacrifice. Any judgment that happens in Israel is always because they're worshiping other gods. It's not because they didn't sacrifice. So I think sometimes, all of that's just critical reading of English. I'm just kind of taking a step back. So, okay, how can I do this? I think I'll probably end up calling a book I write at some point Without Fear and Trembling. And because we can read the Bible without fear and trembling. We don't have to be afraid of the God we're going to find back there. Okay? What we have to do is say, okay, he's plaguing me with flies, so I apparently need to be quiet. No, what we have to do is say, okay, well, I don't particularly like that. Why? Figure out that first. You know, if it's, I don't like that because that offends my sensibilities, get over it and read more critically. And get some good historical information in you, especially with the early stuff in the Hebrew Bible. You know, if it's something where you say, man, that really doesn't look like Jesus. Okay, well, that's a good hint for Christians. Okay. So then what do we do with those? Those are the ones that we study. You know, study to show yourself approved doesn't mean, oh, go through and all the stuff you like, take it, and all the stuff you don't like, throw it out. You know, the easy stuff everyone gets. God is love. Anybody have a problem with that? Do I need to define that for you? Do I need to define for God so loved the world that he sent his only son? Like, I mean, he loved the cosmos. He loved the world, so he became Jesus. You know, I don't really need to do much with that. But I need to do an awful lot with what we've been reading. But you know what? There's going to be other stuff that we find in the Hebrew Bible that we don't have any problem with. Guess where Jesus lifted love your enemies from? Leviticus. I mean, you see no clearer sign of enemy love than when, in the Old Testament, Naaman the Syrian is healed by Elijah while Syria is killing Israel's children. Really? Jesus isn't a social revolutionary. He's a prophet, and he does what most prophets do. He points their attention to the weightier matters of their law. No. The weightier matters are love, folks. You know, like love. Paul says the summary of the law is love. So if you want to go and chuck out all of the Hebrew Bible because you think it's law, you're chucking out love. I think that's enough for today. We'll keep going in this next time. You're dismissed. Amen. Praise Jesus. Hallelujah.